In the second part of the endocrine video, we will look at all those other glands that aren't the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. And so we'll just be running through one at a time. Some of these will just take 15 seconds. Some are a little more complex. But by the end of this, we'll have covered all those endocrine glands and organs that are listed on the table on the first page of the endocrine system subject on Canvas. So we start with pineal gland. This is one more gland found in the brain, but here's my little brain. Let's see, here's thalamus. We did the hypothalamus, this bird's beaky looking shape, and then the pituitary hangs off the hypothalamus. The pineal is back here behind the thalamus. I learned that one way to remember is the pineal gland is deep in the brain, and the pituitary gland is, my instructor told me, it's like a sneeze, like pituitary, and it just kind of hangs off like a mucus off the brain, like if the brain sneezed. So pituitary versus pineal gland. So what does the pineal gland do? Makes melatonin, which regulates the sleep-wake cycle. And I hate cats, but I know not everyone does. So I put, this is my double horns cat. I put this cat in for you cat lovers. There's a kitty cat sleeping with the melatonin helping to regulate that sleep and wake cycle. And if you've got a smartphone and you've got some kind of like night vision mode activated, where it like changes the color of the light that's being emitted from your screen at nighttime, that's because you're trying not to mess with the pineal gland too much. The pineal gland receives input from your eyes. So if you keep tricking the pineal gland into thinking it's daytime, you're going to mess around with the release of melatonin. So pineal gland, check. Next, thyroid gland. This thing here, this Adam's apple, as we call it, that's called the thyroid cartilage. So that's the thyroid cartilage. You can see it in the picture right here. So just underneath that is your thyroid gland. You can kind of mush around for it. It doesn't feel that great to smush on it, but it's in there. So, thyroid gland. It's bilobed, so it's kind of shaped like this, two lobes, and roughly butterfly shaped. And it makes a few kinds of hormones, but really there's two jobs of the thyroid gland. One's all about metabolism, one's all about calcium. So the hormones called T3 and T4 affect the metabolic rate of the cells in your body. These hormones have full names like triiodothyronine and thyroxine, but for this class, we just call them T3 and T4, affecting metabolic rate. Women, especially women, and especially like in their 40s, 50s, 60s, will often have thyroid problems, which will be diagnosed because they will be like really exhausted or sweating a lot and lethargic. And it's because these T3 and T4 hormones are being over secreted, and the body is like ramping up its metabolic rate, but it's just like burning energy off of these people with no real reason to be doing so. So then there's some medications that usually can pretty well help with that. But yeah, if you hear about thyroid problems, thyroid issues, often that's the case. Calcitonin is a different hormone that's made by the thyroid gland with a totally different job. I like to call calcitonin calcibonin. The calci tells me that this hormone has something to do with calcium. The bonin tells me that, what am I doing with calcium? I'm putting it in the bone. Calcibonin. So if the calcium's going into the bone, where is it not? It's not in the blood anymore. It lowers blood calcium levels. Remember, calcium has come up a few times. Calcium works to allow contraction of your skeletal muscle, all your muscle really. Calcium is required in the synapses to cause the release of synaptic vesicles into the synaptic cleft. So calcium levels need to be super closely monitored. So there's this whole hormone, calcitonin, that anytime you have extra calcium, it's going to put it in the bone for storage. Calcitonin puts calcium in the bone, lowers blood calcium. So then the obvious question is like, okay, so it's lowering blood calcium, but now like you need calcium. You stored it away in the bone. How are you going to tell that calcium to come back into the blood so it can get to the brain and get to our muscles and all that? I'm glad you asked. The parathyroid gland, 4-ish, maybe you got 5 or 6 or something, but most of us have about 4 chunks of tissue on the back of the thyroid gland. This is the posterior view, looking at the back of the thyroid, and this picture has 4 little chunks on the back. So the parathyroid glands make parathyroid hormone, which increases blood calcium levels. That's it. So between calcitonin and parathyroid hormone, you're constantly shifting where the calcium is in your body. If you've got a lot, store it in the bone. When you need it, pull it out, send it to the brain and the skeletal muscle and the other muscle and wherever you need it. And then when you get really low, then make sure you eat something and you'll get more calcium. You'll get into this more in your lab manual. It talks about this, but when you have these two opposing effects, these are antagonists. Because parathyroid hormone has the opposite effect of calcitonin. Okay, we're cruising right through. Now these adrenal glands we know are a little more complicated, although hopefully you're already feeling like you know a little bit about them. You know they're triangular. You know the inside is called the medulla, and the outside is called the cortex. And you know that the brain, as the hypothalamus, will send a neuron down to the medulla and zap it when you want it to release epinephrine. And perhaps you remember already learning that the hypothalamus also controls the release of ACTH from the pituitary gland, and that can go down through the blood and cause the release of some other hormones from the cortex, such as cortisol. So we'll see this on the next slide too, but just as a reminder, a couple of ways that the hypothalamus and pituitary are signaling the adrenal and telling it what to do. Here's a look at the wall of the adrenal gland. So like if you can imagine the adrenal gland was super huge like this. Here's the medulla in the middle, and then all of this is cortex. So if we look at the cortex, there's 3 kinds of hormones being made. These mineral hormones, this is the worst. One is called aldosterone. You'll see that in the outline I post and in your lab manual and in the table on the first page of this chapter. But that's a type of mineral hormone helping to balance mineral levels in your body. Not calcium so much, because we already kind of took care of calcium, but plenty of other calcium minerals in your body need to be balanced. The next layer of your cortex secretes stress hormones. This is not epinephrine. This is like a longer term stress response. This is like the kind where if you're constantly worrying, maybe because you're anxious, but maybe because you've got a test in 2 months, or you have a family member who's ill or something that's causing a long-term stress, these are those stress hormones. And one of the things they do is they'll cause you to burn sugar to try to deal with this stressor. But if the stressor is mostly psychological, you don't really need that extra energy to be burned. So there's a lot of health consequences to chronic stress because of this burning of sugar. Your body does all kinds of weird stuff with your energy sources. And you can get little lumps of fat showing up places, and it's chronic stress is pretty bad news. This last section of the cortex is secreting sex hormones. We won't get into the details of why that is, but let's say in general, these aren't having a very large effect on your body compared to the sex hormones secreted from your testes or ovaries. And then last is the medulla. That inner part, we've already mentioned a few times, secretes epinephrine for the fight or flight reaction. So adrenal glands doing a lot, hard work. Now we're down to the last few. Pancreas has 2 jobs, or 3 you could say, but one job is unrelated to the endocrine system. It makes digestive enzymes. That's actually an exocrine function, as the Canvas page talks about. So for the endocrine system, it has other things going on. It makes both insulin and glucagon. And I say both because this is a case where the same gland makes the antagonists. It makes 2 hormones that have the opposite effect. Not like thyroid and parathyroid hormone having antagonists, but the pancreas making both. So this is all about blood sugar. We could be a little more specific and say glucose. We're talking about glucose levels in the blood. Pancreas makes insulin to lower blood glucose levels. And this would be like after you eat a meal. Your intestines start to absorb the nutrients from the food. There's a bunch of sugar suddenly in your bloodstream, and you want to not have that big spike in sugar. So where are we going to put the sugar? Well, one thing we can do is just open it up so that the cells of your body can all take in some sugar. And then if there's extra, we can store it away in the liver. But we'll use insulin to allow the sugar to move into these other places and lower the blood sugar level, which is good. Remember, chronic stress is when you're like constantly putting out all this sugar into the bloodstream, burning up this sugar and having bad effects. You want to just move some into the cells and store the rest away. But then, what happens when you need some sugar and it's not lunchtime yet? So now your body's waiting. It needs some sugar. So then another hormone will be secreted called glucagon. That will increase your blood glucose levels by freeing up some sugar from the liver. And what we say is we break down glycogen. Glycogen is made when you pack away the glucose in the liver. You store it in there. So then when you need the sugar in your bloodstream to go out to your body, you take that glycogen and break it back down into glucose. Yeah. So as part of your future lab, you'll discuss, I think, diabetes, type 1, type 2, and the effects of insulin and glucagon and things like that. Thymus, real fast and simple. We already mentioned the thymus as part of the immune system. Remember, T cells go to the thymus to mature. And so the hormone that the thymus makes called thymosin helps those T cells mature. That's it. And we're into the gonads. Gonads include both ovaries and testes. There's often a common misconception that gonads are testes. Gonads refers to anything that's making sperm or eggs are gonads. So ovaries and testes are gonads. Ovaries make estrogens and progesterone. Testes make testosterone. So these are sex hormones. And they make sperm and they make eggs. So they're doing double duty. They're actually making exocrine stuff that will exit the body, like sperm and eggs, maybe as a fertilized egg that became a human. But they are making stuff that will exit the body, and they are making hormones that stay within the body. So what do those hormones do? They control the primary sexual functions, meaning like stuff related to conception and maintaining a pregnancy and things like that. But they also contribute to secondary sex characteristics, stuff that's not present at birth, such as ... So if you think of it's easiest if you think of the most stereotypical, traditional heteronormative male and female, maybe obnoxious, but just for this example, the secondary sex characteristics in this case would be a male that has increased muscle mass, facial hair, large Adam's apple, deeper voice. Those characteristics are the secondary sex characteristics. Those are because testosterone found receptors on target cells in my thyroid cartilage and in my hair follicles and so on. So I didn't have this or this beard or this muscle mass at birth. That's why it's secondary sex characteristics, comes later. In females, estrogen and progesterone will do the equivalent. Think of a stereotypical yada yada female, wide hips, breasts, the hair and skin are more, they have more collagen, so they tend to be stronger and just overall better, I guess. Lots of secondary sex characteristics in males and females come from these hormones. And of course, as we mentioned, the primary stuff like birth. So that's the end of the endocrine system. You can take notes on these videos to go with the outlines. Make sure you revisit the page on the endocrine system that's posted on Canvas, and let me know if you have any questions and how you liked this system where I post these very exciting videos.